everyone, welcome back to the MyPilgrimage podcast. We're in the studio. We're starting to work on a little bit of a studio space. We got some sound foam here. I got to do a little repair right there. And we got this kind of slowly getting set up thanks to the Patreon supporters that help us do this so we can continue to do better and bigger work. We're also going to be using this space for the Voyagers podcast. When we can start having podcast interviews in person, that'll be in here. Right now, we're doing all that stuff on Zoom. Speaking of Zoom, Seth and I sat down and we had a conversation about sexual fantasies. And the reason we did is because it keeps coming up in the Facebook group, and we definitely want people to have some context or something that they can kind of wrap their heads around. Facebook's a great medium for discussion in terms of kind of getting around things, but sometimes you just need to hear a long conversation kind of going out, especially from people that have really kind of worked on this. And Seth and I have spent a lot of time working through and talking about the role of sexual fantasy and how it plays out in people's lives. Because, as you'll see in our discussion, there's nothing wrong with having a sexual fantasy of any kind. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But how we play that out in our real lives and how that thing comes out in our expression is really, really important. So we're going to get into this conversation. We don't have a video to play. We've been doing that every week where we've had kind of a video that we previously recorded, but we never did one on sexual fantasy. So right now we're just going to jump right into the conversation that Seth and I are having, and hopefully you get something from it. If you don't, if you do, make a comment. Go over to the Facebook group and let us know. So without further ado, here's the conversation. I'll see you at the end. So today we're going to talk about fantasy, specifically sexual fantasy.
Yes.
We can talk about other fantasies in the light.
Is there another kind?
There are.
How's my sound, by the way? Am I good?
Yeah, you sound great, man.
Okay.
Yeah, sound great. Look great. Nice shirt. I like the Banana Republic Quick Dry.
I know, man. I love these things.
Yeah, they're super comfy shirts, man. And right now they're super cheap. BananaRepublic.com.
Factory. It's the factory outlet, though, right?
Factory outlet. Yes.
Yeah.
Super Quick Dry shirts. They're wonderful, and they're only like $5 right now or something like that.
Oh, geez, I gotta get some more.
Yeah. And they are not a sponsor, so you're welcome, Banana Republic. If you'd like to sponsor, mypilgrimage3@gmail.com.
Yes, and then you won't be sponsoring child labor somewhere in the world, like
yes,
David
exactly.
just did with his endorsement.
Exactly, right. We're going to talk about sexual fantasy today, and the reason is because it did come up in the group, in the Facebook group, and there's been I've had lots of other conversations on the side with different people and dealing with that. And one of the members even just posted a video in which she was talking about a coworker. I just said she, so obviously it's Tina.
We got like three. I think there's three women on the whole thing.
Yeah. But talking about a coworker and about how there's a sexual tension between them, and there's a kind of how the mind kind of goes there in terms of you begin to think about those kinds of things. So I wanted to crack into it. I'm going to start by just talking about just some of the kind of the actual practical realities of sexual fantasy. First of all, there is no bad, wrong, or sinful sexual fantasy. We have to get past this idea that the thoughts that go through our brain carry an eternal weight to them.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's big though. That's big. That's such a huge part of the whole porn addiction thing. Like, how's your thought life, man?
How's your thought life, right?
How's your thought life?
And we very much translate that to I'm ashamed of my thoughts. I feel guilty for the thoughts that I have.
That you're supposed to have certain thoughts.
Yeah, you're supposed to have certain thoughts. Certain thoughts are normal thoughts and certain thoughts are not. I've been married for 23 years. I'm a very happily married man. I have a healthy, happy marriage. I'm actually crazy about my wife. I have been since I met her. And but I can honestly say that I'm kind of crazier about her now than I ever have been. Without getting too much into my sex life with my wife, we have a healthy sex life. And one thing I want to disclose to all the younger people in the group that haven't been married for a long time or haven't been in a long-term relationship, including Tina and anybody else who's listening, sexual fantasy continues after you get married. It's not like you get married and then you get to go and you can, it's actually it's a completely normal human function. The most common sexual fantasy in the world for anybody, for men and women, is having sex with multiple partners. And these things all mean something. You have, BDSM and, people that are dealing in all kinds of sexual, it's all over the place and everybody has them. I was a teacher. I taught K through university, and there were a few times, especially when I was a college teacher, where there were students that were really sexually attractive and stuff like that. And I would have those fantasies would go on. And back then I would be like, man, I really don't want to think about that. And so I disciplined my mind in that way. And that's because at the time I was teaching, I'd actually already gone through kind of a bit of a healing process. So I had a way to kind of work through some things. Mm-hmm. And this path does deliver that eventually, where you can get to a place where your thoughts don't control you in that way, in any way, shape, or form, but none of it is bad. And so I wanted to kind of say that up front, that whatever you're finding in your sexual fantasies, if you're trying to do hardcore psychoanalytical work on yourself and go, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? There are lots of people and books and things like that about that. And you can you can read all kinds of people's opinions about what it might mean. But you also don't have to necessarily, in terms of on this path, and that you can actually dig into the internal energy work of yourself, and you can start working through those things. And some of that stuff gets ironed out. Sure. I want, jump in when in terms of what your own thoughts are. I have some other thoughts I want to talk about, especially related to pornography and that kind of thing, but go ahead. What are your kind of initial thoughts on this stuff?
I echo your echo of my echo.
My echo. Yeah.
No, I think psychoanalysis, honestly, I have friends that do it, and I think it's a long, arduous path to a place that if you lean into the energy,
right,
you're going to get there a lot quicker.
Right.
But it requires a certain level of ego separation, meaning like most people, once they begin to think about the thing, they get sucked into identification with it so quickly that they start their cycle of the dopamine kicks in and the endorphins start rushing, and then they move into an actual experience. Like if, every once in a while I'll have someone, I'm really struggling with my thought life. I'm like, what about, I go, in a session, I'll go, why don't you just go ahead and we're going to bring in your favorite porn star, or something like that.
Yeah.
I'll go, let's just bring them in. And I want you to see her right there. I had a guy do this the other day, and he was saying, I said, ask her why she's here.
You're talking about in spirit. You're bringing them in.
Yeah, in spirit, in the meditation.
Yeah.
Ask her why she's here. She's like, she said she's here to please me. And I said, tell her, no, you're not. And he did that. And she's like, and he said that she started changing. All of a sudden she looked like a weird ogre kind of thing, and an entity kind of emerged.
Right.
And it's like, no, you're not. Because what I was doing was trying to teach him how to feel the energy. I said, can you feel the energy?
Right.
It feels kind of nasty, doesn't it? It's like, yeah. Right. And it's not any type of moral thing. It's just a super low vibration. Right. So most fantasies you can kind of follow them down, but if you just follow what your body's experiencing,
right.
and honestly, it's centered on the chakras,
right?
Not necessarily on your genitals,
right?
It's on your actual chakras, what you're experiencing in your chest and your heart,
right?
And your solar plexus, and your stomach,
right? What you're saying is we get into, just like in everything else, once we get into the energy, very quickly the fantasy component of this kind of takes a back seat and goes,
it just goes.
What are we dealing with it? And that's. Man, that was my experience.
You've never told your story about
I haven't.
How your porn addiction actually ended.
Oh,
you don't tell it in the book either. You told about your story in the book is about your first process with Floyd, but you don't tell them about the process where it actually ended. Yeah.
Right, which was just like 2 days later.
Yeah.
And that said, I hadn't looked at porn for 2 days, or I didn't need to or want to or whatever. I don't know. It's weird to talk about it ending, but there was some. Okay, you know what? I'll tell the story. Why not? We'll do it here.
There you go.
So when I went to White Raven Center and had my first process, and those of you who have not read Feels Like Redemption, this is chapter 4, and it's a story that I tell that basically was the beginning of this whole process, this pathway for myself and indirectly for Seth as well. Yeah. That Floyd had taken me into this room and laid me down and covered me with a blanket, blindfolded me, began working through the energy in my body and teaching me how to do that, and then and he just guided me along this path for like 2.5 hours at the White Raven Center. whiteravencenter.org for those of you who are curious about what that is. It's a healing center in Anchorage, Alaska. Sacred place. It's saved my life, that place. I, like many things that I've done in my life, kind of when somebody shows me something, I go, okay, I can do that. And so 2 days later, I was in my office in downtown Anchorage. It was late at night. I often worked late, long hours at an agency that I ran. I was by myself. I started to feel that tightness in my chest. And for the very first time, instead of thinking, I want to look at porn, which was always my reaction for over a decade, to try and numb that. I was very conscious that there was a thing in my chest. And I was like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want that there. It doesn't have permission to be there. It's got to go. So I'm in my office alone. I went close the blinds. It's dark outside. I laid down on the floor. I turned the lights off. I grabbed a T-shirt there was a spare T-shirt in the office or whatever. So I took it and I actually tied it as a blindfold. I laid down on my back and I just started doing the breathing that Floyd had shown me, just deep breathing. He would always say, fill your body with air all the way down to your toes, just that big, deep breathing. Yeah. And I started doing that, and that tightness in my chest kind of coalesced into a sharp central point. Yeah. I'm a very visual person. I've heard others say, I can't visualize. It's okay. You have to learn your intuition will teach you. You have to learn your own way of processing energy, whether you're feeling. Some people, like my buddy Jared, is a feeler. Yeah. He has to feel everything. That's how I'm some people are very visual.
I'm a little bit visual, but I'm led by my feeling.
Right. I'm very visual. Like I can introduce vision, like things, and it's extremely, I see everything very crystal clear as if it's like right there. And so I very quickly, kind of that sharp point, I look down at my chest, even though I'm blindfolded, but I'm using kind of my third eye, I guess, or my internal, intuition. Yeah. And I see this syringe stuck in the center of my chest, and it's got this green liquid in it. And I'm physically, I'm in the room, but spiritually I'm in a different space now. And so I go to pull that syringe out, and I'm physically actually doing the motions with my hand, but I worked to pull it out and I couldn't pull it out. And so I just said a prayer. I said, God, I need help. Please help me pull this thing out. And it just pops out. Right. And as it pops out, I'm just like, oh, and I feel this kind of release of this stuff start to kind of ooze out of that spot where the syringe was. And then I sense this presence behind me. So I actually sit up. I physically sit up. I'm still blindfolded. I'm up, and I get up on my knees. And I turn around, and I see this porn star, this specific porn star that I had I'd looked at the most. She was kind of the porn star I always went to. And she was very sensual, that was the thing I was kind of into, was this very kind of exotic, sensual beauty. And she's sitting there, and she's naked, and she's moving, and she's doing this whole kind of groove in front of me. And I'm like, but again, I'm waking up to this new thing, and I'm like, something is not right here. This doesn't make sense, right? Because I'm not enjoying this. This is the thing that for years and years and years, I just craved and craved and craved. And then I just was like looking, and I kind of looked harder at it. And then I could see this other presence. And it's like you could see, but you couldn't see at the same time. There was just this other thing. And my intuition, my spirit just kind of went, oh. And I just said, and I said it out loud. I said, I see you, you son of a bitch. And the words kind of came out almost before I even really processed what was going on. I didn't know what was going on because no one had taught me this. And I hadn't learned this from White Raven Center yet. And I hadn't heard any of this. But there was a presence there that I knew intuitively was masking itself in this person. Yeah. And right when that happened, like her eyes changed color and she like popped out a little bit. Mm-hmm. And this creature thing, very black and dark, this tar thing. And I just immediately said, you have to go. And it kind of laughed at me. And I felt kind of just like, I felt kind of defeated. And then I felt my hands getting hot. I looked down, and on my right hand, I had this sword. It was there, and it was just like glowing. And then I looked to my right, and my wife is standing there, and she's looking at the porn star thing. She's just standing there, strong. And then I looked down, and we'll get into this later. If any of you guys have questions, please don't make fun of me. There's a house cat. I don't know why there's a house cat there. I think I know why now.
Because David's spirit animal is a house cat.
It's a tiger. But it's this little house cat, and it's like and it's hissing at the demon thing, at the entity. And I was like, all of a sudden I started feeling stronger. And then I felt this intense warmth behind me, and I looked behind me, and there's like angels, just thousands of them. And they're just standing, this glowing light just standing behind me. And then I was like, oh shit,
WWE entrance.
Yeah, totally. It was. I turn around and I point the sword at this entity and I go, "You have to go now." And it starts to get up, but it's getting up with the porn star body. And just something inside me snapped and I went, "No, you don't get to take her with you. She's a child of God." I said, "Leave." And he peeled out of her body. And these are words that I use. Obviously, I was still very much an evangelical Christian at the time. And so I used these words, but it worked. It was great. And it jumped up onto like the windowsill of my desk. And it turns around and it says to me in a very kind of, Clark Gable voice, says, "I'll be back." And I said, "I'll be waiting, but there's nothing for you here." And it just jumped.
Interesting you chose Clark Gable instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger,
No. Clark Gable, I was thinking, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn kind of thing. Yeah. Come on.
I was thinking I'll be back.
Honestly, I'm not a huge Schwarzenegger fan. I do like the classic old movies, Gone with the Wind is not my cup of tea, but Clark Gable is, he's badass. Anyway, the thing jumps up on the window, it jumps out. The porn star gal kind of fades. She falls away into the floor and just disappears. And I all of a sudden just kind of lit up on fire, just. And I just sat in it and I cried a lot, but it was these not tears that were sad. It was just pushing out of me. It was energy and motion moving out of me.
Yeah.
And I sat there in meditation for an hour. I just didn't want to leave it. It was just the most intense feeling of peace and love and stillness and just being. There was no anything else. It was just sitting in the light of this acceptance and love. And when I was done, I took my blindfold off and I was just I went and met a friend for a beer afterwards at a bar that was close by called Bernie's, and we were talking and I just realized that he was a good friend. It was all of a sudden I could feel him differently. All of a sudden I was this guy really cares about me. And it's crazy. I was and afterwards I was thanks for meeting up. This was awesome, man. I thank you for, I was all this love was pouring out of me. And I just was and he was yeah, man, I love you. You're a great guy. And I love hanging out with you. And I was thank you. It was, I was just, it is. I was feeling everything,
Yeah. No,
but, and that, it's interesting. This is a side note. It's a couple of years ago. I was for some reason that porn star popped in my head, and I was I wonder what she's doing. So I literally go online to search and go see if she's doing any new porn, and not as in I'm gonna go look at a bunch of porn. It was literally I want to see where she was at, and she doesn't. And come to find out that she's a mom now and is married and has a normal life, and she's actually kind of a progressive kind of activist and doing all this stuff for all this really nature stuff and everything. It was really beautiful. And I was I wonder if I had anything to do with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think about that.
Why not?
I think about it and I go, I wonder if that was a helpful kind of thing in that moment, that maybe that somehow that released her in a way or helped her kind of start working down that path,
Oh.
So all that said, for me and how it's functioned in my own life is that my sexual fantasies have changed drastically over the years. They went from lots of porn stars and all that kind of sensual thing and all that, moving away from all of that to a point where my sexual fantasies have no control over my life at all.
Right.
My wife and I talk about all of them. We talk about hers and mine because that's the realm we get to live in. Yeah. And if we want to do stuff, we get to do stuff, but it's now this very healthy, normal part of our sex life in terms of to be able to discuss those kinds of things. And it's never anything that I have to hide.
Right.
That said, sometimes there are sexual fantasies that take place that we are ashamed of or that we are scared of and that we have to, that maybe we do hide. So why don't you address some of that?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what started this. Is somebody had posted on the site about some of his fantasies being, he said, if I were to act them out, would be illegal. And just, if he's listening right now, that's not that uncommon. Just, you're not alone in that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Lots of people have those kind of fantasies. I've had fantasies at times that took place spontaneously. They weren't ones I, created or dwelled on, but I'd have things that would, some sort of form of violence would come in or something like that. And we've known, David and I have known people, when you do what we do and helping people with this stuff, you run across just about everything. We've had people come in and confess things to us, and we've had to help people work through some really, really intense stuff. And we've had people end up in spaces where they're dealing with police and things like that. It happens. So the hard part is that you can get into this space where if you're entertaining those types of fantasies, if you don't develop the skill of moving into it energetically, then it will torture you. And it's going to be very difficult, because guilt and shame becomes a way of surviving that fantasy.
Right.
Feeling guilty about it keeps you from doing it. And if you live in an egoic space, and that's where a lot of the church lives in. There's a lot of Christians, they live in that egoic space. Guilt and shame serves the purpose of helping them survive. And it keeps them from tipping over the edge into these spaces that would either send them to hell or get them in trouble or do these kind of things. And if you're going to live in ego, yeah, sure. You need that. Right. But if your goal is freedom, the guilt and shame has to go first.
Right.
That goes first. And then we can start to move into a space where you can learn a higher level of skill of knowing how to energetically move into those fantasy spaces. And it's relatively simple. It's not actually that complex to do it. But what I teach with people when I'm working with people in this kind of space is just going, let's just bring it up, and then let's start asking it some questions, because it's similar to what you did with the porn star. I've done that before, where something comes up and I'll just flat out, hey, what are you trying to teach me?
Right.
You know,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why do I see this? And even asking spirit to invite spirit into that space.
In the fantasy space.
In the fantasies, yeah.
So what you're saying is, if our friend who has a fantasy that he says could be illegal, if he was to act it out, you're saying in that space, when he's having that fantasy, to invite spirit into that space.
Yeah, spirit, show me what this is.
Show me what this is.
And show me where it's coming from, and how do I work with this? Right. And it will center itself on a chakra. You will find it'll probably, when you're dealing with that kind of stuff, you're likely going to feel it down in your stomach. You're going to deal with a jammed up, you think of it like weeds in the garden.
Right.
There's an energetic weed system that's moving through your garden, and to begin to pull those weeds out it takes an energetic skill to it. That's why it's helpful working with someone. Just so you guys know, I help people with this kind of thing if anybody needs professional help. But it is one of those things where working through that with a good therapist, that's where even if someone's trapped in their head and they're trying to work through stuff, starting with psychoanalysis is actually quite helpful. It's not going to get you complete freedom. It's not going to get you the freedom you want. Psychoanalysis is helpful in beginning the process, helping gain some self-awareness so that you can then start to move into the energetic basis of it.
Right.
It's not going to get you to the level of freedom you want. I promise you that.
Right.
Because psychoanalysis is largely an egoic process. It lives in the mind. Yeah. So if you're not going to address how trauma is held in the body, then you're going to have a hard time actually getting free from that.
Right.
But it's absolutely, I mean, these fantasies, like when we talk about fantasies, it would be so interesting if we put 20 people from the MyPilgrimage Facebook group, all in a room and said, okay, tell me about your fantasy. Tell me about your fantasy. And sometimes I'll just do that. I would do that with people quite often when I'm working with professionally. I'll just go, we're working with some guy, you go, you a boob guy or an ass guy?
Yeah.
And they're just like casually, what? Yeah. Come on, man. Tell me. You boob guy or an ass guy? No, and that's just a simple fantasy thing. And they go, I'm a boob guy. I go, oh, interesting. And we start moving into this. And almost all the time you find this child in them that's deeply nurtured at the breast. It's this kind of baby to the boob. And that's a little mini version of psychoanalysis right there.
Right.
These different things, fantasies, positions, type of, the forbidden fruit is a really interesting fantasy. There's people like, I want, and my fantasies are all around having affairs and keeping it secret, things like that.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's a really interesting. So we could do psychoanalysis that's helpful to a point to get a little distance between you and what it is you're dealing with. But then at that point, you have to learn how to lean into it energetically, because whatever you resist persists.
Right.
If you live in a judgment of those fantasies and in a resistance or in a guilt or in a shame space with those fantasies, it will persist. You're going to live in a constant kind of polar tension with that, as opposed to being able to move fully into it. And that's a really, really, really interesting kind of thing. That's the thing. Like, if anybody that's listening to this is like, yeah, I really struggle with this, get some freaking help, man. There's like, if there's any message Dave and I are trying to say, just more quickly move it. There are so many well-paid, really well-trained, well-educated professionals out there whose job it is to help you with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And if money's your excuse, then you don't really want to be free.
Right. I know.
Yeah. You don't really want to be free.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to the point where I didn't have a dime in my checking account, but I would take my personal belongings that I treasured, things that I really treasured, and I would take them to the healer or to the therapist, and I'd say, "Will you take trade?" I did that. I had a guy. Do you remember the Lord of the Rings book you gave me, the classic edition with the rib? I traded that for help.
I know.
And when I gave that guy a whole bunch of my stuff, and I remember it was like a couple years down the road. He walks out one day and he just hands me all the stuff back. He hands it all back to me, and he goes, I go, "Oh, you don't have to do that." And he goes, "No." He goes, "What mattered is how much you cared about this." Right. And I was like, "Thank you." And then he showed me the Lord of the Rings book. He goes, "I'm keeping this." Damn it! Because the only thing he kept was that book. But it's a great. But I had to do it.
Edition, man.
I would have given away everything I owned.
I know.
Because the freedom I was beginning to experience was so beautiful and so valuable.
This is Jesus' thing with the rich man. Hey, just go sell everything you have. Give it all. Follow me. And the good dude's like, yeah, about that. I didn't you have like a book, or is there a podcast I can listen to?
Is there a podcast I can
you send me a link?
That is the modern version of that story. We should honestly do modern versions of Jesus stories, because that would be like, there's a podcast. Right. I got a guy right now that keeps telling me he wants to work with me. It's fascinating. He keeps telling me he wants to work with me. And he says, "Well, I want to do it like this." I go, "No, well, here's what I do." And for those of you guys that don't know, I do 12. We start with 12 sessions, one per week. And there's a little bit of homework, and it costs $2,400. It's not cheap, and it's really effective. But he keeps going, "Well, I want to do this. Well, can you take payment plans? Can we do it session by session? Can we do this? You know what? I think I'm gonna do one session." And I go, "Nope, this is how I do it. It's what I have to do." Then like a week later, can I do 3 sessions? I go, "No, this is how I do it. This is what we're going to do." And then yesterday he texted me. He's like, "I'm going to do 2 sessions. I'm going to fly up there and do 2 sessions with you in person that week." And because I do counseling better in person. I go, "No, you're not." But it's weird because it's just this thing. And at some point you have to surrender into and just fall into your lack of control. And fantasies are like that a little bit, where you can gotta go. This is the weirdest thing is the very nature of fantasies is that we don't have control over them.
Right.
They happen to us.
Right.
And so, like everybody's trying to wrestle this thing into its, like, I need it to be the thing I want it to be. No.
Right.
Lose your judgment, lose your shame, lose your guilt, get real curious real quick and lean in energetically, and then get someone to help you with it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Get someone to really help you with it.
So in that way, fantasies are kind of related to triggers, right? In a way that they are a gift, if we see them that way. So
they're related to dreams. They're related to it's how the unconscious functions.
Right.
The unconscious projects itself into our conscious world.
Right.
I mean, if anybody here has ever had a nightmare that they can remember, okay? Yeah. Here's a good way to practice. Nightmares are interesting because, if you have one you remember, like a recurring nightmare or something like that, that itself is a matrix. You can literally go into it. Like I had a kid show up. She's 14 years old. She's a soccer player, and I'm working with her on the field. She's local, and she shows up and says, "How you doing?" She goes, "I had a nightmare last night." I go, "Really?" "Yeah." She goes, "Really scary dream." I go, "Huh?" She goes, "I'm really tired." I'm like, "Do you remember the dream?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "Well, tell me about it." She says, "Well, they have a pool in their backyard," and she's like, "Well, it was like my brother and my mom and my dad. Like there was these 3 like kind of strange figures of some sort. Like I think they were people, but they were all dressed in black, and they kept coming in at night and coming into our house and taking us out one by one and killing us in the swimming pool." And I'm like, "All right, okay, good, that works. Let's do that." And she's like, "We're gonna go." And I just sent her back. I go, "Do you remember it?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "Let's go right back into the dream." So I said, "Okay, I want you're in the house." And she's like, "Yeah." And I go, "Okay, when they come in, make sure you tell me when they're about to come in the house to get you guys." And she goes, "Okay." And I had her like, I forgot what it was. I had her holding an object in her hand to use light. I said, and she's like, "They're in the house." I go, "Okay, I want every one of you and your family members to raise your hand, and you're going to blast these things with as much light as you possibly can." and boom. I mean, entities just started moving. I mean, we transmuted 3 entities.
Mm-hmm.
And it works the same with fantasy. It works the same. You can go into it like she went into the dream.
Right.
There's an unconscious matrix, and there's an unconscious thing playing out inside of you. So try moving into it.
Yeah. So those of you guys who have posted about this or are curious about this, that's actually a thing we're just saying. Here's a little homework is to go into it and to bring up those fantasies in spirit. In a meditative space. That's it's not to go enjoy your fantasies. That's not what we're saying. We're saying bring up that fantasy. And often in that space for me, if you need help in that space because you don't feel like you can figure it out, bring in someone to help you. That's a trusted person, a teacher. Even Jesus is helpful in this situation for those of us who have a faith in we believe, or that Jesus has been our teacher on this path.
He's been my guide. He's been my number one guide through this whole thing. He shows up, and he's much less interested in healing me, and much more interested in my learning. He's always been like, "You got this," and he just anchors me.
Yeah,
every once in a while he's jumped in and spontaneously helped me with something. For the most part, he just kind of stands there and goes, "You got this."
Right.
You can do this.
So interestingly enough, this is what I want to go back to. When we're talking about fantasies or whatever, we're talking about these processing experiences as well. I want to go back to my house cat. So you said spirit animal. We can talk about spirit animal stuff like that. When we talk about in spirit, often we talk about guides or helpers that come and help us in this stuff. Jesus is somebody, and you can bring people in at will. I've had all kinds of people show up. Mother Teresa showed up in a process I was doing one time. It was really helpful. Yeah. And because, we all believe in spirit. If you're here and you don't believe in spirit, you should probably, go find a different podcast. But the spirit is part of this process. And since the spirit world is kind of an unlimited connection and unification of all things, that we have access to a lot of help whenever we need it. The house cat showed up, and it was years later that I was doing a process dealing with some real rage about some abuse that I took physically when I was a kid from an uncle. And this tiger showed up in this thing and just ripped him to shreds in this process, like defended me and like ate my uncle. Like just like brutally, like tiger killed him. And I remember sitting there, and then when the tiger turned around and went over and it licked me in the face, just like at this, and
uncle blood all over your face.
Yeah. And then I knew, and right then I recognized it was the house cat. And I don't know how that happened, or I don't understand that part of it. I mean, I can kind of analyze it, based on things I've read or heard from others. But I don't really feel like I need to figure it all out. I just know that I have this helper, and there's times where I just bring in the tiger, and I've brought him in many times. And
Floyd, I had that happen with the wolf.
Yeah.
The wolf started coming to me, and I didn't understand it because I was evangelical at the time, and I was like having these experiences. And I went to Floyd. Floyd's like, "I have the spirit of the wolf." For those of you guys know, Floyd he's Klinka. He wouldn't
Haida,
and Haida, and he wouldn't like it if we called him a shaman, but he kind of is like that. He's
what he is.
Village elder, yeah. But he said, "I have a spirit of the wolf," and I was like, "What does that mean?" And he goes, "Well, think of it like angels." He goes, "The Creator gives us spirits of his animals to help us." And I've had a lot. I mean, I've had animals show up in sessions with clients all the time. And when I got an evangelical, I'm always like, how do I bring this to them? Because like there's like a bear in the room, and you're like, bear is here to help them, and usually they love it. Like when you. Yeah, your friend, because they're like, because they can feel it too. That's the thing.
Right.
Like, all right, hey, do me a favor. This is gonna sound a little weird, but I want you to just picture a grizzly bear walking into the room, and then all of a sudden you'll feel the vibration just go, and just like through the roof.
Yeah.
Whoa, that was weird. That was cool. I'm like, it's I said, well, God really loves us, man.
Right. Well, it is an interesting thing, because if we don't sit there and if we're not prescribing to this evangelical form of Christianity is the truth, and it is the one ultimate revelation of God, and that's the thing. If we've gotten rid of that idea, which I hope we have over the course of these 12 episodes or whatever, if we've gotten rid of it, then what we're looking at is this notion that that other spiritual paths or other ways of understanding God and spirit there've been some contributions there. And one of the great contributions, especially the Alaska Native tribes, the Tlingit, the Haida, the Tsimshian. I mean, I can go over and over with a lot of them in the north, and even all the way up to the Inupiaq in the Arctic. Their entire spirituality, of course, was built around nature. The Inupiaq had been on the north slope of Alaska for 10,000 years, and it was built around nature. The season was around snow. Yeah. And not snow, right? And that was it. Yeah. And it was around snow, is it ice and not ice, right? And so the bowhead whale, the seal, the caribou, the raven, these are all the ptarmigan, the different birds, the owls, the snow owls. These they all carried the spiritual meanings of they were the metaphorical spiritual things.
Almost all the Native American tribes have that as a part of the tradition, but what we're trying to emphasize is that there's an actual reality to it. It's not just a mythology. People say, well, it's just, and a lot of there's a lot of mythology, there's lore, there's
absolutely.
The idea of the coyote as the trickster, these different stories that you find. But then there's an entire different component of when you actually embody the spirit of an animal.
Right.
But it is very similar to angels. It's just helpers.
Right.
That's all it is helpers. And it's an incredibly powerful thing. I can show it here. I have a tattoo of a wolf right here on my arm.
There it is.
Because the wolf, when the wolf was coming to me, Floyd said, he says, the wolf is the teacher of wisdom. And he said, if the wolf is walking with you, then you're a teacher. And I was like, yeah, that's interesting. And every time that Jesus would show up with me, he would have a white wolf with him.
Right.
And the white wolf would always walk with Jesus, which is really fascinating. But it is. It's I don't know how we kind of. I guess the point to tie this into the concept of fantasy, the point is that the lines between imagination and quote unquote reality are pretty blurry.
Yeah.
The key is that we understand that the fundamental basis of it all is quantum energy vibrating at different frequencies, and the key to the healing is being able to lean into that energy. And let it take all that fantasy out of the realm of thinking mind, and bring it into the realm of quantum energy and unconscious stuff pushing up, man. Like, do that work. And anybody here that does that work is going to find it actually is a pretty accelerated way of working, because fantasy and dreams and deep unconscious and those types of states, even, some of the psychedelics that are available to people to use, that kind of stuff it's much easier to work in those states, like heightened breath. That's one of the reasons using your breath can induce a state where the unconscious essentially opens up and pushes its way into the conscious world. And it's so much easier to work.
Right.
So you take advantage of your fantasies, push, lean into the energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're in those states. So, yeah.
Well, man, I think that's a pretty good spot to kind of cap this.
We're not going to talk about our weirdest fantasies.
You can, if you want. Go ahead.
No, sure. No, please.
I don't have anything. That's the thing I was thinking about. I was like, I don't have anything
interesting. Like mine, I think threesomes is probably is probably the most radical I've ever gotten.
Yeah, me too. But one of the things that's funny, and I don't fully understand this, is that over the years now, especially after being kind of a whole person for a long time, and just being on this path for a long time, I have my fantasies. It's not that they haven't gotten that I don't have them. It's just that they've gotten, I don't know, more gentle and kind of simple, and they're all pretty much centered around my marriage now. And it's weird. It's weird to me that I don't think about porn stars ever. I don't think about pornography. I don't think about. That's always strange for me to go, because I remember when it just dominated my life completely, and to go, wow, there's no pull at all ever. And so it's a strange thing to reflect on. And so even anything around sex, I don't feel bad about it. I don't feel guilt about it. I don't.
It's just to be observed.
Yeah.
Because it's not relegated to the mind anymore.
Yeah.
When spirit's running the show, that stuff, the mind just doesn't have that kind of power. You can just observe everything.
Right. Well, we went there. It was a good conversation. I hope it generates more conversation on the Facebook group. So whatever you're thinking right now, maybe take some time to yourself, maybe go for a walk. It's a nice time to kind of get up, go out of the house, breathe a little bit, work through some things and just contemplate. You don't have to rush to judgment on things, but if you have comments, questions, concerns, things that are bothering you, go to the Facebook group and let us know, and we'll talk about it. It's a no judgment zone. We're all there to kind of give each other courage, and we always start with by hoping the best and understanding that everybody's working through at their own pace. So come on over there, make your comments. We'd love to see it. So thanks again for tuning in. You guys really appreciate it. We'll drop another one of these when it's needed. We're just kind of doing an as-need basis right now as far as the episodes, and really enjoying it. So love to hear feedback too. If you guys have feedback for me, it's mypilgrimage3@gmail.com. MyPilgrimage, all lowercase, and the number 3@gmail.com. We'd love to get that feedback. It's really helpful. So aloha, everybody. We'll see you next time.